Do it. Thank you. Mr. President, I acknowledge that we are meeting on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay respect to Elders past and present, and to all Elders and Aboriginal people across the state. I offer my respect and apologies to the stolen generations, and I express my gratitude and admiration for those members who came before the reparations inquiry. I also acknowledge that I'm from Arakwal-Bundjalung country and pay respect, especially to the late Elders, Auntie Yvonne Graham, Auntie Lorna Kelly, Auntie Linda Vidler, who taught me so much, and to Auntie Dulcie Nichols and Yvonne Stewart and Delta Kay. Thank you for adopting me into your family. I want to state my support for constitutional recognition and reform for Aboriginal people. As a non-Indigenous person, I believe it's crucial to have recognition of First Peoples in Australia's constitution and the removal of discrimination. The Greens have strongly campaigned for constitutional reform, and it's essential that we see a successful referendum as well as treaties with the original custodians of this land. I hope I get to see those outcomes achieved. As I stand here to give my final speech as an elected Member of Parliament, after informing the House of my intention on the 11th of October, I can advise that it hasn't been easy, but thank you all for your kindness. What has been most rewarding is that it made a difference to others. Some people have shared their experiences with me, and it confirms that we all need to communicate more honestly about how we feel. The best response is that some people have said that they will address their own situations and take the time for self-care. That makes my decision to be publicly honest about my struggle worthwhile. We need to break the barrier and the stigma of mental health. We need to be more open about pressures of life and make it okay to speak openly about our feelings and responses to a chaotic world. Politics is a very strange environment to work in. And for those of us who put ourselves in the public arena, it can be very challenging to our well-being. Don't we know it? I've spent 17 years in public life, 13 years in local government and 5 years as a Member of Parliament, as the 48th woman to be elected to the Legislative Council and the 4th female representative of the Greens New South Wales in this House. It's been an incredible honour to serve the community and the Greens. I note, however, the recent declining representation of women in this House and other parliaments, something that should be of concern to everyone in this place and society. When I nominated for pre-selection, it was not because I held great ambition, but because it was important to have regional representation for the Greens in Parliament. I'd had the experience of working here from 1995 as advisor to Ian Cohen, the first Greens member of the Legislative Council. I did so for 4 years and then headed home to Paradise, Byron, having been accepted to study law, but instead I ended up in local government. My pre-selection came as a surprise, and with the Greens affirmative action provision, I was designated the number 2 position on the ticket. At the time, I hadn't thought through the reality of being elected as an MP and remaining mayor in terms of doing both jobs and the pressures involved. So when I sat here on my first day and looked around and thought, here's the chance to do politics differently, as I had done in my time in local government. I looked around, as I do today, saw the mix of people, many of you who are still here. I committed myself to find with each of you a common connection, a way to work respectfully and positively to serve the people of New South Wales. I'm not comfortable with adversarial politics. As Mayor, I'd spent too much time in the media and not always with good outcomes politically or personally. I've watched the dumbing down of democracy, and I believe both the media and politicians have colluded in that process. The 24/7 media with the focus on slogans, personality politics, and the fascination with internal party politics results in scant focus on issues. My focus has always been to seek outcomes and not focus on media coverage as a key performance indicator. At home, we're fortunate to have independent media, with the Byron Shire Echo and Bay FM Community Radio. My community has always had a voice, and local issues are reported exhaustively, sometimes too much so. But the community feels that the media serves them and provides accountability of their representatives. Democracy is the powerful tool for peaceful and respectful social change, but I think we as a society can do democracy in a much more respectful and civilised way and achieve better outcomes. I also think that many in our society are at a point where they're tired of the narrow inward focus. Democracy is about them, not us. I believe democracy requires the fundamental principles of respect, honesty and trust, and I have tried to perform my roles with those motivations. Unfortunately, my current view of politics is tarnished by the fact that I think we've seen better days in the delivery of democracy in New South Wales. As I mentioned, my first experience of working in this parliament was over 20 years ago. After an exhaustive campaign for the 95 election, I experienced the high of the first term of the Carr Labor government. The election campaign had delivered a priority on forest and environmental protection, and Labor did deliver outcomes that reflected those priorities, at least in the first term. They were good times. People cared about the environment and climate change was being taken seriously, and there seemed to be a more caring society and Parliament. My activism and council role provided the experience of being in service and the responsibility and accountability to my community. As a Green in National Party heartland, I learned early on that it was important to listen and respect the views of others. I value the times when I have learnt from those with differing views, especially when it's caused me to rethink and sometimes alter my position. In community, it's when the times when you're on opposing sides of an issue and then the next day you can be united. This is when the best is revealed, when you come together as a community. And this for me is the value of the experience of grassroots democracy. This is the reason why I enjoy committee work. It provides that opportunity for members representing diverse party political positions to work collaboratively, delving into an issue, receiving submissions, hearing evidence, and then working together to develop responses to inform government. I believe the complexity of issues must be balanced with a focus on finding the simplicity of the most effective response. Empowerment is an example of this. The need to deliver self-determination to communities and identify when and how government can assist. Each inquiry I've participated in has been an opportunity to grapple with an important issue and work with my colleagues on finding solutions. Thanks everyone who I've worked with. I began with the inquiry into tourism impacts on local communities, an issue I was already well versed in from being on council in an area that was experiencing the pressures of popularity. The commercial use of residential properties affects housing affordability and availability, changes the commercial nature of tourism and can deliver antisocial behaviour into neighbourhoods, also adds infrastructure pressure with no financial return to council. I acknowledge the opportunities of new technology and business models to transform society and potential benefits, from opportunities to share resources and bring people together in a more direct connection with one another. But I have real concerns about the uncritical enthusiasm for anything that's branded a sharing economy. Disruption is not always a positive outcome for communities. Other inquiries included same-sex marriage laws, drug and alcohol treatment, young people and alcohol abuse, and volunteering among young people, which I expanded to include the important aspect of unpaid work and internships. My portfolios have covered the range of vulnerable and disadvantaged areas. With housing, I came into contact with the pressures on the system to deal with increasing numbers of people affected by growing vulnerability and insecurity. Homelessness is on the rise, an inevitable result of the growing inequality and the government focus on housing as an investment vehicle rather than the platform for people to have a secure life. The impact of the GFC has revealed itself, and changes to employment with increasing casualisation, more contract work and the loss of traditional employment is leading to greater insecurity and instability. In late 2013, I proposed an inquiry into social, public and affordable housing. We delivered 41 recommendations that were met with positive response by the key organisations that work in this area. We must never forget that housing is a right and it provides much more than a physical structure for protection. It provides the stability and security necessary for people to engage and enrich their lives. It's time for the state to take up those recommendations and planning reforms like inclusionary zoning, time to invest in public housing and ensure tax policies are targeted at promoting housing for all instead of profits for investors. In this term of Parliament, I was very proud to be elected Chair of General Purpose Standing Committee number 3. And I thank members for their support and that opportunity. Our first inquiry was into registered nurses in nursing home. In response to concerns, the government would remove the requirement. I acknowledge the work of the Midwives and Nurses Association, and I note that some of those wonderful people are with us today. Thank you for being here. Thank them for their commitment to older people and those that they care for. In this inquiry, and then the inquiry into elder abuse, we heard sad and at times traumatic evidence of how the system fails to adequately ensure the protection of vulnerable people. Government must provide the protections and the provision of services to care for the elderly. The saying that we can be judged as a society based on how we care for our most vulnerable is a good test, and one that we as a society are failing in many areas. The state must continue the requirement for a registered nurse being on duty at all times in residential homes, especially for high care patients. I urge all parties to continue to support those important safeguards and standard of aged care. In addition, my successful motion to create an advocate for older people is one that I hope the government will deliver on. But in terms of committee work, I take the greatest pride in the final inquiry I proposed and chaired into reparations for the stolen generations. Since 1994, I've worked closely with the Arakwal people of Byron Bay. The ongoing relationship with the elders and the families meant that over time, the trust developed and they shared insights into their lives with me. I was shocked by much of what I learned. This has fuelled my commitment to seek reparations for Aboriginal people. The mistreatment of Aboriginal people under previous laws and policies of government is an ongoing stain on our history. The inquiry was a rare privilege to work with some of you in exploring why the response to the recommendations of 1997 Bringing Them Home report and the New South Wales Government's response have not been fulfilled. The impact of the forced removal of Aboriginal children has resulted in intergenerational trauma, and we must recognise the responsibility to address the wrongs, and it must be done quickly as many survivors are ageing. To my colleagues and the Secretariat staff, thank you for your commitment. I note that they are here today, and especially to Tina, who was so helpful, and to the Minister, who is also in the President's Gallery, the Honourable Leslie Williams. Thank you for supporting the inquiry. We achieved a significant outcome with the delivery of the report, Unfinished Business, and I appeal to the government and all of you to deliver on the report's 35 unanimous recommendations, and it's essential they're all supported. They provide a holistic approach to the need for reparations and will change the future. During my first term, I was struggling. Some of you noticed, some of you didn't. The pressures of having the dual roles of Mayor and MP caused physical stress, and the emotional stress was mounting. It was during this time I received a death threat. Scared the hell out of me. And as a single person living alone, it caused me anxiety and, for the first time, insomnia. At the same time, the death of friends was having an impact. Grief takes its toll. When my time on council finished in September 2012, I set myself a task to regain my health and vitality for a single role of service. It soon crashed with the diagnosis of my brother's cancer. His death within a few months, the grief, and then my mother's cancer diagnosis. The new Byron Council, elected in September 12, secured a majority Green and Progressive council. But then shortly after the election, one councillor elected as a Green turned. I felt hopeless watching on as this turncoat undid decades of work by the community to protect and reserve the special place I call home. This contributed to my focus on some crucial local issues in this place, including coastal management, inappropriate development and mismanagement of Crown Caravan Parks. At the same time, I was doing my best to fulfil my responsibility in this job, with, among others, the portfolio responsibility for Aboriginal affairs, ageing, disability, housing and family and community services. These portfolios highlighted the plight of some of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged in our society. I determined early to take constituent concerns directly to ministers to seek outcomes, and I want to thank all ministers I have dealt with. For the most part, they and their staff, who are amazing, have responded well and recognised when the system has failed or when a review was required to support those in need. That gave me great faith. It's difficult to have systems that will deliver for all people. The strongest recognition of this is in the child protection area and how it relates to other issues such as housing, mental health and substance abuse. We must recognise that the system fails when people, and particularly the children, fails the children because the fear of them being taken away from parents is so great that it's often the case that engagement with support services doesn't happen until it reaches crisis point. This is why some who are at risk of homelessness don't approach the system early for fear of the repercussions, the threat of child removal. Government must provide the appropriate safe option for people to approach an agency early. A culture change is required for the well-intentioned system to meet the challenge of supporting those vulnerable and disadvantaged in our society. Early intervention is what's needed, and I'd hoped that a fiscally conservative government would recognise the value in that, because avoiding crisis isn't just a moral responsibility, it makes financial sense. Early intervention in human services also benefits well-being. I include here the opportunity for justice reinvestment and call on the government to support it to break the cycle. Another point about fiscal realities is how and what we value. Government has the opportunity to recognise the social, cultural, ecological and intellectual values of society. Only then can you truly assess the potential impact of new proposals that may erode those values. Everyone's so quiet. Thank you all for being here. I'm really proud to be a member of a community that understands the challenge of strategic planning and the responsibility of confronting future risks and developing strategies. This week's passage of the biodiversity laws was hard to witness, but I wanted to be here to witness. But I offer my congratulations to Dr. Maureen Faruqi and her staff for putting on the record the arguments in support of nature. I'm also very proud of the activism and community cohesion response when government is not serving the people. Bentley and all the anti-coal seam gas groups across the state have been a high point in the delivery of peaceful, creative, non-violent, direct action, and the knitting nanas are inspirational. I think I'll be wearing yellow in future. Jeremy Buckingham and his staff achieved great outcomes in that area. Thanks, Jez. That experience has driven two pieces of legislation I've introduced into the Parliament. I proposed a climate change bill, a governance model to address the state's responsibility to avoid foreseeable risk and deliver a whole-of-government approach to the challenges and opportunities of climate change. The government recently announced aspirational targets of net zero emissions by 2050, but it's not supported by statutory obligations, interim targets, or government-wide planning on how to deliver or to address the risks posed for health, agriculture, disaster management and the environment. It's a breach of the government's duty of care to the people of New South Wales to not have in place plans to ensure a safe future, and I fear that we are now in a state of climate emergency. I also proposed a strategic whole-of-government approach with the Wellbeing Indicators Bill. Other governments and non-government organisations have recognised the platform for change available if we broaden our measures of progress beyond GDP. Data capture and analysis can inform government about the progress and performance of existing programs and where the need is greatest. The Productivity Commission, in its report titled Deep and Persistent Disadvantage, recommended that governments do more by way of identifying information about the distribution of social and economic outcomes to better inform policies and programs. For too long, vulnerable and disadvantaged people have been neglected, while governments use overall statistics to claim the economy is delivering for our state and society. I introduced these bills because I believe it's essential that Parliament and government work to achieve long-term improvements in the quality of the lives of all citizens. I've also had some success with motions, and I hope they will be looked at seriously, and I will be following up, you can be sure. In the area of Aboriginal affairs, this House supported motions to provide the seniors card to Aboriginal people at age 45 in recognition of their reduced life expectancy and to provide the access to much needed services. An annual Close the Gap report for New South Wales that includes social justice and housing also was supported. I encourage the government to act on these. In the area of child protection, a successful call for the government to ensure all young people in out-of-home care are supported by a leaving care plan. Only 27% are currently. We need to ensure that they are assisted to prepare for independent living, and we need to extend the provision of support to them when they leave care to the age of 25. I thank the government for delivering on the increase to the taxi transport subsidy scheme. Other successful motions relate to carer support, homelessness, mindfulness training, disability support, and a few other important issues affecting the lives of the most vulnerable in society. I'm also pleased that I've been able to achieve at least a dozen successful motions on climate change. They're on the record. And then there is libraries. Who in this place can forget our debates on libraries? I don't understand why government doesn't deliver on increased support for one of our most valuable community institutions. They are good value, but communities will suffer if their operations decline because of the financial strain that has been cost shifted to local government. Okay. Pleased that a number of members are into libraries. Thank you. Although my focus has always been outward on trying to achieve meaningful outcomes, I've reflected on how the politics within this place and within my own party have impacted on and contributed to my decision to leave. I'm going to need a tissue, I think. I have a hanky.
Here we go. It's clean. Here we go.
Thanks. No, No! How many?
It's clean. It's clean.
Recycle it.
Thanks, Jan.
As a long-term member of the Greens, I never imagined the pressures that I would feel from my party colleagues, and that the greatest source of conflict in this role would come from internal politics and the failure to adequately accommodate the diversity among our members. On the 15th of September 2011, several of my colleagues and I spoke to a motion about boycott, divestment and sanctions movement. We had different perspectives on this motion, reflecting the different perspectives of party members. Hansard records the considered positions we each took. There was no vote on the motion. But within our party, the issue was fraught and there were recriminations about the comments. A complaint was lodged and it spiralled to the point of a threat of expulsion. That complaints process took 18 months and ultimately still remains unresolved. It led to the circulation of misinformation that inflamed some members and led to me being abused at a State Delegates Council meeting. The bullying and conflict involved in that situation left me feeling unsafe. Perhaps I was foolish to comply with the insistence on confidentiality, including not discussing the complaint with members of my local group. To this day, many members of our party would be unaware of the tensions and machinations that were operating to create pressure and turmoil for some of their elected members. It was a complicated and stressful time. These issues were at the forefront of my mind when I gave comments for an article about the Greens in the February 2012 issue of the Monthly. I recently went back and looked at that quote. Here it is. "We've watched other parties self-destruct," said Barham. "That's a big test for us to prove we're different. We want to be able to find another way of balancing that political process where division can be dealt with and inform us in a decision-making and not be a point of resentment or real division, but part of our strengths." At the time, I thought those comments represented a constructive view. Yet again, they were a cause of some criticism and tension. Having had another look, I stand by them. I firmly believe that the success of our party and the movement we represent relies on accepting that we will have differences, we will not always have unanimity, and yet we can continue to work together based on the values that we share and draw strength from the difference to operate in an open and welcoming way, not engage in secrecy and personal attacks. For 25 years, I've been a member of the Greens. I've been committed to the principles, but have also been aware of diverse views within the party. I do not shy away from diversity. I promote it and uphold its value. I believe we have a responsibility to protect not just biodiversity, but social diversity, which enriches and enhances our society and political life. In recent times, there's been public exposure of some of the nastiness that has emerged in the Greens. And it saddens me that some members exhibit behaviour contrary to the core principles of the Greens. My experience in recent years has left me convinced that the Greens need to focus on how to embrace and allow the party to engage in a more respectful acceptance of the diverse perspectives and approaches to being green, and realise our shared commitment to a better, fairer and more caring society and future. The membership has recognised the need for review and reform. We've undergone a grassroots governance process and many positive ideas have come about, but reform has been slow and challenging. I wish the party the best of luck in a mature review of its operations. At the end of the first session of this Parliament this year and the completion of the reparations for Stolen Generations inquiry, I returned home to the North Coast to assist with the federal election campaign. I'd been working closely with our Richmond candidate, Dawn Walker. I'm really pleased he's here today in the President's Gallery. Having raised critical issues in Parliament such as the Gold Coast Airport, biodiversity protection, including the protection of the Cobbockeye Broadwater and Aboriginal land rights. The changes on the North Coast over the last 25 years have been fascinating. I've watched as the community has come to know us and I think trust us as we represent their interests. In 2015, the Greens secured representation in the seat of Ballina with the election of Tamara Smith, who's also here, or was, till the bells rang. And in Richmond, there was growing support for Dawn as a candidate. I spent election day in the Tweed and feeling exhausted, decided to skip the party and just go home and watch the TV. I was thrilled that Richmond delivered the highest swing in the state, a 5% increase, which is great. But overall across New South Wales, the Greens' results were mixed and an overall low Senate vote. It was perplexing, considering how so much important work was being undertaken by increased number of Greens representatives and our vote wasn't growing enough. That's the night I realised I needed to take a break, to reflect on what I was doing and how it was impacting on my well-being. Thankfully, since then, there's been some good news for the Greens. With the election of Justin Field, I'm very, very pleased about that, and the strong votes at local government elections in September. In the regions, we've done well, increasing the number of elected councillors and popularly elected mayors. In Byron, Simon Richardson was re-elected and we have now held the mayoralty for 4 terms. I'm so proud. In Bellingen, Dominic King was elected as mayor with 2 Green councillors. In Shellhaven, the community elected Amanda Finley as mayor along with 3 councillors, and in the Tweed election, former Green Mayor Katie Milne received the highest vote, and we await the vote of councillors for mayor, and my hope is that Katie is returned to the role. These are the positives that continue to inspire me. But I also want to thank some other people. A few are here today. I thank Sandra Halpin and my friends Jan Daly and Steve Dixon. I also thank Barbara and Ivan Stander, Becky and Tom Jachtenberg, Kate Brady, Dave Millage, Nanette McKinley, Kate Coorey and Philip Shine, Helena Norberg Hodge and John Page and Andrew Murray. Many thanks to my former Byron councillor Tom Tabart. He has been by my side for the 25-year-long Green political ride. I also thank his partner Noel, who has been very understanding. I thank Richard Healy, a long-term friend who has supported me during my time in the city, and of course I thank Ian Cohen, former MLC, who in a great part was responsible for me achieving the political life I would never have imagined for myself. And to Bob Brown, I thank him for decades of inspiration and friendship. Times have changed and I'm now exhausted and unable to meet my own standards. Due to my depression, migraines, anxiety, anemia and arthritis, I've lost the enthusiasm and optimism I once had. For those who have shown their concern, I can advise you, I haven't had self-harm responses, but I do recognise my lack of self-care. I've chosen to take the action to remove the stresses and external pressures and redefine my life. I'll take time out to care for myself and be there for my mother and friends and do more gardening and basket weaving. I do. And there may be a book in me.
Oh no. All right.
I have a double garage full of stuff. I look forward to my health and energy returning so I can continue to serve the community. My present loss of hope will pass, I'm sure of that. When the bells stop ringing will help. I'll continue to advocate for action to look after our communities and environment. And I want to thank those people who have worked alongside me. Bronwyn Regan, Sylvie Elsmore, Ella Buckland, Tony Jones, Jocelyn Howden, Gail Broadbent, Scott Hickey, Charmaine Crowe, and especially I want to thank David Mallard, who is hiding over there, who has been with me for 4 years, and to note that Sandra Halpin, who is not only a friend, she's volunteered in my office for 5 years. Thanks, Sandra. I want to thank all the amazing staff of the Parliament. Special warm wishes to the clerk, David Blunt, and all the chamber and committee staff, the attendants, and everyone who works to keep this Parliament operating and supporting us. Thank you. I thank the President, John Harwin. You're the fairest President I've ever seen. Thank you. To all members, I offer my respect. It's a tough job, and I appreciate the opportunity to work with all of you and develop some unlikely friendships that I'm going to make sure we continue. But take care, all of you. To the organisations and individuals who have assisted my office in advice and insight into issues, thank you. To my Green colleagues, you all work extremely hard, but I will always offer advice about working more respectfully and collaboratively. I'm so grateful for the experience of serving the community and the opportunity of working in this place. Thank you all.
Hear, hear. Little green pixie, eh?
You'll miss it.
Thank you for your friendship, Dan. Pray for your health and strength.
Hey, it's hug day. I love it.
Thanks.
So Byron. Yay.
Coming up to visit. Just wait a moment.
You'll need to adjourn. God, beautiful one. Beautiful one.
Leader of the government.
You have to pay for it.
You should rotate.
Suit the convenience of members, I will now leave the chair and cause the bells to be rung here.